I have a guest with me today who I've known for quite a while. He's a fellow sergeant, he's a fellow police trainer, and he's involved now in an organization called CLEAT, which he's going to explain. And he's going to talk about the positive things that his organization is doing for police officers in Texas. And he's also going to talk about some of the things that are happening in Texas that really affects law enforcement nationwide. Chris Jones, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Betsy. Good to see you today.
So, Chris, you retired after a really long and fascinating career in law enforcement with the Houston Police Department, and you became involved with an organization called CLEAT. What does CLEAT stand for?
CLEAT is the Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas, and in effect, they are, quote, union. Some people take that with a negative connotation, but we basically advocate for law enforcement officers, and most importantly, we provide legal defense for our members in the event that they're involved in either a critical incident or an officer-involved shooting, in custody death, or any other internal investigation related to their department.
Chris, how many officer-involved shootings or critical incidents did the CLEAT lawyers respond to last year?
It was over 100. We've already responded to over 48 this year. We represent approximately 26,000 members, Texas peace officers, correctional officers, and detention officers in Texas. We represent the majority of the larger departments in Texas, but also have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of members in small departments spread out across Texas.
Now, Chris, CLEAT recently made national news because you guys discovered in Travis County that their district attorney, their civil rights division, was looking for an attorney or attorneys to hire specifically to do something that seems pretty untoward. Can you talk about that?
Well, it actually goes back a little farther than that. We have a new district attorney in Travis County that came in this last year after the last election cycle. And he was one of these folks that were backed by money, outside money, progressive DA who has an agenda to go out and prosecute law enforcement officers based on the activists that we have seen through Black Lives Matter movement, Antifa, and some of the other groups that are out there. We have some local groups in Austin that are right in the middle of that issue. In fact, this DA has gone back and reviewed cases that have been closed over the last few years, and has come back and opened those cases again and filed charges against officers. I'll give you one example that is really kind of amazing. We have a former CLEAT member or a current CLEAT member who was with the Texas Department of Public Safety, a DPS trooper here in Texas, who was involved in a case here in Austin. That case was cleared. The trooper applied to become an FBI agent. And the FBI looked at the case and looked at his background and hired him as an FBI agent. He is a current FBI agent, and this new DA has come in and filed charges and is prosecuting this FBI agent for that closed case from several years ago, and we are having to represent him.
So here's the thing I want people to understand is that your district attorney in Travis County is very much like the DA or the state's attorney we have George Gascon in Los Angeles County. We have Kim Fox in Cook County, Illinois, Chicago. We have all these progressive, very often George Soros or other outside money backed district attorneys and state's attorneys who are doing two very dangerous things. One is they are pro criminal, and they are anti-incarceration, and they are also pro-prosecute cops for use of force cases that very often the officer's already been cleared, or the officer was doing exactly the right thing, and yet the DA's office is going after them. So
Yes,
you
that's
guys,
correct.
go
And
ahead.
that gets us to the issue at hand that you asked me about, which was the head of the Travis County DA's Civil Rights Division went out onto social media and sent emails and made public postings looking for a new prosecutor to specifically be hired to prosecute cops. And the whole tenet and tone of the messaging was that we're not looking for somebody that's a good prosecutor. We are looking for somebody that's specifically biased toward prosecuting law enforcement. And that sent a very bad message that you are going out of your way. You're not looking at the facts. You're on a political agenda to prosecute cops.
And here's the thing that I want people to understand is Travis County is Austin, right? And it's one of the largest counties in Texas. And the Austin Police Department already has, and we're going to talk more about this, is already in a battle with, their city leadership, city council, and they're being defunded. And because I think a lot of people look at Texas and think, wow, Texas is such a back the blue state. And yet there's a lot of areas of Texas that have fallen victim to this anti-police movement, this defund the police movement. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. There is a huge contingent of these types of activists that are based out of Austin. A couple of groups come to mind. One is called Austin Justice Coalition, and another is called Just Liberty. They are specifically on a mission against law enforcement. They have basically hijacked the Austin City Council through months and months of protests and activism and shaming, political shaming of these politicians, to where the Austin City Council just flat out stopped cadet classes, shifted a whole ton of money. And I don't know all the specifics off the top of my head, but the bottom line is they took millions of dollars out of the police budget and shifted it to other funding needs within the city budget. And it has had a dramatic effect on crime in Austin and safety and morale in the police department because of these decisions.
Well, sure. Austin used to be one of the safest cities in America. And now I know their violent crime is rising, and they've had to disband many of their specialty units. And the thing about Austin, it's also a big tourist town. And so many of their specialty units were dealing with the tourists. They had a motorcycle unit, a mounted patrol unit, and things like that. So a lot of the things that these activist groups call for, like more training, more community policing, are going away because they're being defunded, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Just over the last month or so, they have stopped or have initiated a process to stop the DWI task force, the motorcycle unit, the traffic enforcement unit. They are absolutely, they've hired a civilian outsider to administer the police department, and they have now changed they have reimagined the police department's academy. The students don't wear uniforms; they come in suits, and it's a complete civilian instructors. It's completely gonna affect, I think, in the long run, what we do to protect the community, because the whole mind shift is going to take away from that attitude of running toward danger and putting your life on the line to protect the public that I've done for 31 years in Houston. And we've seen it in just things that have gone on. Just this last weekend, we have a big tourist party area called 6th Street in downtown Austin. And there was a shooting over the weekend where 13 or 14 people were shot. And what they didn't, what you didn't see in the mainstream was some of the videos that you can see now out there of officers running into danger and then carrying people out to the ambulances, putting their lives on the line to protect the people that were shot in these situations. And those are the heroes that we have working every day in Texas. But the narrative has been hijacked, and the perception that the public is getting has been hijacked. And that's what we went through in this battle in the Texas legislature this session.
So talk about what CLEAT is doing about this, because you guys are very involved in the Texas legislature, and your legislature is limited in their time, like most legislatures are supposed to be. Texas actually follows that. You have limited time in the legislature. Talk about what CLEAT is doing to make those changes in Texas that are not just pro-law enforcement, but they're pro-law-abiding citizen.
So Texas has a legislature that meets once every 2 years for 140 days, January to June, basically in odd number of years. And we have been a steadfast advocate for our members during that legislative process when the legislature's in session. We are on the ground with a lobby team consisting of not only full-time staff, but we hire outside paid lobbyists as well, and also bring in some of our local leaders, like the departments, the bigger departments have ability to send people up to participate. And so we're on the ground during the process, reading and evaluating, thousands of bills. In the past, usually 10 to 20, 30, maybe reform-minded anti-cop bills are filed. This session, after the George Floyd incident and Breonna Taylor and some of the others that are floating around the country, which I have to say are isolated cases in the grand scheme of things. People tend to forget that there's 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country that are making millions and millions of police and civilian interactions every day. And in totality, only about 1,000 people are shot by officers, and the 99% of those are justified use of force because they're either protecting themselves or a third person. We have under 50 usually every year of unarmed police shootings. So the narrative has been hijacked by the activists to sell their agenda that cops are murderers, that we go out and we go out every day with the intent of doing harm to the public, when in fact 99% of the interactions are done professionally and perfectly, and the public is well served. What we have today that we didn't have 20 years ago is technology that allows, everything that we do now to be videoed and put online. And so what the public sees is those 1 or 2, 3 or 4 cases each year that are outliers that shock the conscience. And it doesn't matter what legislation you pass or what you do, as long as law enforcement officers are human beings, they're going to make mistakes. And a mistake is different than intentional conduct. But even you're going to have some officers that might make bad decisions. And those are the ones that are spread all over YouTube and put out all over the media. And the narrative is that when you see someone like, the officer in the George Floyd case on TV doing what he did, then the narrative is pushed by all of these activists that every cop in America is doing that. And it's absolutely false. And so that translates to politicians who serve in the legislature filing hundreds of bills to fix perceived problems that are not problems at all.
Right.
And so instead of addressing issues like training, and God, I could go on all day about problems with training. It's the systemic racism, in my opinion, is not systemic. I mean, we have come a long way in hundreds of years of how we deal with the public and how we hire and how the quality of people that we put on there and the education and training that the officers go through. There's going to be some that slip through the cracks. The problem is we learn through repetition. And so we have an in-service training program here in Texas. It requires officers to get a minimum of 40 hours in service every 2 years, but that's minimal. And the problem is officers don't learn by going into a classroom and watching paint dry for 8 hours. So we don't have the interactive hands-on continuous training that we really need to train officers to be proficient in the ability to de-escalate, to communicate, to address issues that we find are deficient. And that goes back to the problem that we've got officers working long hours because staffing, that's a systemic problem, staffing. Officer fatigue is a systemic problem. When you're having to work officers 60, 80 hours a week, or they work for departments where they barely make minimum wage and they're having to work second jobs in order to feed their families, then fatigue is a systemic problem. So those are the systemic problems: training and staffing and hiring and having enough people so that you can let people take off to go to training, and then offering the right kinds of training. So we did have hundreds of bills filed this session. Most, I'm happy to report, failed to make any progress. We as a union took a position that we had to be reasonable and we had to look at things that we could do better. And we did that. And because of that, we negotiated 4 or 5 issues that passed basically policy statements, which would be things that are in our statewide code of criminal procedure that would apply to our departments that already currently apply to many departments. Prohibition on use of chokeholds and neck restraints. The one thing we wanted to ensure is that the ability of the officer to still protect themselves in a deadly force situation, they could use any method to protect their own life or protect someone else. And that bill, of course, outlaws chokeholds, but it can be used in the event that it's necessary to protect your own life. Anything that attack the Graham standard on objective reasonableness, and I can go into that in a few minutes, we had to maintain that standard, and we were able to do that. We passed a bill on duty to render aid. And again, officers have to do that when somebody they encounter is injured, but there's an exception if they are in their, fear of their own life or they're not physically able to do it. So those are the kinds of things, those kinds of bills that did pass were highly negotiated by us and others.
Chris, that was an excellent explanation of what's happening in Texas. Now, let me ask you this. I know CLEAT has a team of lawyers, and so your members can, and any officer in Texas who gets involved in an officer-involved shooting is probably going to want an attorney. Why is that? If you're a police officer who's been involved in a deadly force situation that's completely righteous, you did absolutely all the right things, why do you need a lawyer?
Well, because when you are involved in a use of force situation, you have gone from the responder to being subject to a criminal investigation. The DA and the investigators are going to look to make sure you didn't violate any laws when you use that force. And so we have a duty to protect our members and represent them when that happens. When officers involved in use of force, it's a highly stressful, highly emotional event. Basically, the officer is not thinking, correctly after that. There needs to be some time to recover. And so we want to make sure that the officer doesn't say anything it's not about hiding anything. It's about making sure the facts are reported correctly. And so the officers, we have a policy that our officer is on the scene within 2 hours after being called. We have an on-call attorney 24/7. And so within minutes after you call our critical incident hotline, the on-call attorney is talking to the officer, giving them legal advice until the actual attorney gets to the scene.
Wow. Last question, Chris. A lot of the defund and reimagine police movement, a lot of them talk about getting rid of qualified immunity. And I don't think people really understand what that is. Can you briefly explain why that's such a terrible idea, not just for law enforcement officers, but for the public who needs our protection?
So qualified immunity is another issue that's been hijacked and has not been correctly explained in the media or anywhere else. Qualified immunity is not absolute immunity. It is not immunity for intentional acts such as civil rights violations that has been addressed in 42 USC 1983, a federal statute that officers get sued under all the time, about an intentional violation under color of law, that you intentionally violated somebody's civil rights. It's qualified immunity deals with mistakes. Because we're human beings, we go out there and we intend to act the right way. And our motives are pure to do something.
I'll tell you, Sergeant Chris Jones, you have given us so much to think about, and you've explained some things about what's happening in law enforcement, not just in Texas, but around the country. And we sure thank you for spending time with us today.
This year, over 50,000 law enforcement officers have been assaulted while on duty. A vast number of these attacks were filmed and uploaded to social media in the pursuit of likes and attention.
What they want to do is film you instead of like, what can I do to help this officer?
Together, we can change this disturbing trend.
If that individual would have hit the right spot, it could have been it for me. Last time I would have saw my wife, my kids.
I'm Mike Solon. Law enforcement officers need your support. If you see an officer under attack, then follow these simple steps in order to help. 1. Call 911 and give the officer's exact location. 2. Ask the officer if you can assist. If the officer accepts, then do whatever you can do to safely help. 3. If the officer declines, then start filming and be a good witness. It's time to stop filming and start helping.